Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of Leaders of Innovation, the show where we explore the topics and trends impacting accelerator programs and innovation delivery teams, both here in Australia and also internationally. Today, we're lucky to be joined by Jeanette, Cheah, CEO of the Hacker Exchange and expert in residence at Catalyzer and recent finalist at the Telstra Business Women's Awards. Jeanette co-founded the Hacker Exchange, which is an international program enabling students to incubate their own startups in international hubs such as Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, Singapore, Austin, Melbourne, or virtually. Thank you very much to COVID. Jeanette also leads tech diversity programs at Monash University, is a mentor and pitch judge for accelerators such as Catalyzer, Techstars, and RMIT Launch Hub. And in addition to all of that, Jeanette is fond of cooking up a storm or raising money by smashing giant gingerbread houses. Jeanette, you are very welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, the first question I ask everybody is, what are you working on right now?
Well, we are just mopping up virtually from having run 2 concurrent programs with students around the world. So founders and students from 10 different countries have been through some HEX programs in the last couple of weeks. So we're currently doing our user experience research. We're doing our feedback forms. We're doing our reporting and preparing business development for the next round of virtual startup programs that are coming up in the next few months. So it's really just a lot of transition time right now. It's actually a great time to be chatting.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got an awful lot going on.
Been good.
I guess, one of the really interesting things I wanted to talk to you about today in this particular episode is you have a very unique perspective on what's happening across international startup ecosystems. So as mentioned in the intro, you've spent quite a lot of time both in and taking founders to some really central kind of hubs. What are the kind of trends that you've been noticing, both in Australia and internationally in the startup ecosystems now that COVID-19 is having such an impact?
Well, I mean, I think what I've noticed is that a lot of people are now doing things, and we are certainly doing things that we could have done all along, but we just kind of didn't. So for example, you mentioned we take students and founders to these incredible ecosystems. So we'll physically fly them to a place like Singapore or to San Francisco and incubate them into that sort of that city. But right now we can do a virtual program and have an all-stars lineup of speakers from all of the different cities that we visit. And we always could have done that. We just kind of forgot. So I'm certainly seeing a lot of our colleagues around the world quickly realize that their audiences have actually increased substantially and finding ways that they can change up their communication style and change up their business development style to kind of engage with those audiences that have now suddenly become so front and center right here in their laptops.
Yeah, it's something which has been coming up as a trend is, we've spoken about forced evolution as being a really, I guess, clear way of describing what COVID's doing to a lot of different ecosystems. And obviously, the startup or innovation ecosystem is no different. And that idea of it accelerating what was happening anyway with people's migration to technology does make things pretty scalable. I think some of the programs we were talking to were saying historically they ran 50 and now they were running 500 virtually in a batch. Less intense, but they were able to have more touch points with this kind of high level number. Because technology has been adopted across the board, does that change the composition of the programs that people are running as well?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, a program we ran recently, we intended to have 4 universities from around the world. So we had, people in Southampton, the UK, UC San Diego, ANU and Monash. So it's like 4 big unis from different cities. We thought 3 time zones, great, we can work with this. What we didn't realize was because of COVID and because it was a winter break in the Northern Hemisphere, summer break, a lot of the students were in their home country. So we ended up having students in 10 different countries. We ran a 23-hour program because we had to cover all these different time zones. And in terms of the composition, all of a sudden you're dealing with students in Spain, in China, in Russia, in Mexico, in America. And what's super cool about it is that they are all having a very similar lived experience. They're making friends with each other, and all of a sudden those barriers come tumbling down. So it's been really, really fascinating to see that come together.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
How are people collaborating online? I mean, do you find there's a very different dynamic now that it's all virtual as opposed to in person?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the things we've noticed is people struggling to decide like what's the right etiquette for online engagement, and
Hmm.
what's the, how are people working through, cameras on, cameras off, etc. We have taken probably an approach of saying, what's the best practice in an in-person workshop or an in-person delivery, and how can we best apply that to a virtual sort of space? So whether that's something like music at the time when they walk into the room, and whether it's having, great engagement. We've kind of come up with this term, and I'm going to share it with you first. This is an exclusive. I haven't written this
Ooh.
down anywhere else yet. But I'm kind of calling it like party at the front, business at the back, the reverse mullet of online programming.
Reverse mullet. I absolutely adore that.
Are we with it? Because what we found is like when you're delivering programming virtual, and this, the founders are interacting, you need to be almost at 200% energy. You
Mm.
need to use your body. I often stand to present. You can like lean in. You can kind of use your space in a different way. But then the planning of delivery from the point of view of the people doing the program, you almost need to be militaristic in the back end. So it is business at the back, party at the front. And so we might be playing Usher's Yeah on program, but at the back we've planned that.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting way, and I think if the people running it have that level of confidence, it actually changes the dynamics for the people participating. And you really just don't want to get away from that whole one-to-many communication vibe. The
Mm.
more interaction you can generate, I think, the better.
Yeah, I love that. I really think it's a great idea. With the kind of interaction via technology, and again, this is actually something which Big Al, Alan Jones, was talking about when we had him on a little while ago, was that idea that it's actually really easy for people to become fatigued if
Absolutely.
it's all 100% virtual. And that's why I love the idea of injecting the music into it and kind of, choreographing this
Yes.
kind of experience for the users. Um, you did mention something interesting, which is that in order for the end users to have a successful journey,
Mm-hmm.
the people delivering have to be at 200% energy, and obviously putting in all of this choreography choreographic work.
Yeah.
So how does that affect the delivery team? So, I mean, is there more pressure on the team and more stress now than there was, or is it making it easier because it's possible to do it from home?
I mean, I would probably say it's a little bit more pressure because not only are you responsible for great content and great energy, but you also have to make sure all the tech is working. So the rehearsal kind of vibes are higher for teams that
Mm,
are delivering. Um, but having said that, like, I guess people who are great facilitators in person, they probably pride themselves on being able to read the room. I can see someone nodding, I can see someone on their phone, I can kind of get the sense of what's happening in a workshop or in a
mm,
accelerator program, and like know what I need to do to adjust my energy for that room. It's very hard to do that virtually, which is why I think participants need to really understand that their active participation helps the presenters, and then that in return makes a better program. So like my call out to anyone who's participating as a student or in an online class is like, give your presenters some goddamn feedback. We need to see the nods. We need the thumbs up. Like if you're on mute, everyone do this. Like Wakanda
yeah.
forever. We need to see some physical feedback and some chat, engage with us, because that is what is going to energize your presenters, and that's going to make the whole experience better. So it's like a real,
Mm.
like, it's teamwork to make a great program online. I think it's a lot of teamwork.
Yeah. And I mean, look, as they say, obviously, something like 2/3 of communication is nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
So those cues that we all get and we read subconsciously and consciously are so important. And I guess it's tough, because if you can only see people from the shoulders down or thereabouts, you can't see if they're tapping their foot or what they're doing with their hands. So they might actually be taking notes. But
Mm.
as far as you're concerned, you might
They
think they're
might be on
typing on
their
their
phone.
keyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which makes it tough. So in terms of program delivery, if
Mm.
you were giving advice to somebody who was designing a program today in this kind of new dynamic, what are kind of top three things that you kind of would say, all right, here's three things that I would recommend that you consider when you're putting that program together?
Um, I mean, I think I would say start with, like, you start with being very user centric. It's the same advice you'd give to anyone building a product or an experience. It's really put yourselves in the mind and the experience of that user. Um, and think about what do they need, whether it's down to the breaks, as I assume that you and Alan spoke about, whether it's down to mixing up the technology so it's not just Zoom fatigue. Maybe you can have different kinds of networking software. There's some great ones out there. Maybe you can allow them to actually just have a phone call and encourage walk and talks amongst the team.
Mm.
So those kinds of things I think are crucial. So having that user-led journey, like take the time to, as you say, choreograph and plan from the back end. Plan your polls, pre-prepare them, do the tech rehearsals. Kind of boring stuff, but it's the same that you would do with like making sure your slides are fine. And then I think I will come back to you on this one because I've totally lost my train of thought, but it was a good one and it will come back to me in probably 5 minutes.
You'll have a eureka moment when I'm halfway through some sentence. You'll be like, stop, Brian, knowledge bomb. I like it.
Now I promised that I'm going to deliver.
So for the Hacker Exchange, obviously, fundamentally, this is, as we said, about cross-pollination, taking minds and humans from one geographical location and then kind of giving them the opportunity to be like sponges in another, geographical hub. How have you been adapting to, kind of the new kind of travel restrictions that are happening? So what have you guys been putting into place to manage that?
I mean, I've not been at home this long, I think, in years. My dog, my cat, and my British man are very happy to have me home. But it's been an adjustment, and I think for us as a business, it actually forced us to go, okay, what is it that we're actually providing? What's the value? Because if it's just the destination, then we may as well just be a Kentucky tour. We may as well be a travel agent. And we very quickly realized that's not the only value we're providing. At the end of the day, we're trying to create transformational experiences. We want to create the innovators that we need tomorrow. And in order to do that, there's a few key ingredients, that yes, there's the destination, but more importantly, it's what's a transformative experience that someone can have, even if they're sitting in their bedroom. So we put a lot of thought into like trying to redesign what that could look like. Oftentimes it includes the introduction to brand new people, and not just an introduction, but suddenly you have to rely on them. Suddenly you have to do things with them. It's collaboration with a new network. We spend a lot of time trying to understand each individual participant and what their goals are. So there's a lot of like personal accountability there. So I think you mentioned before this concept of people are starting to increase their cohorts. We've done probably two things. One is we found a model where we can have an increased cohort with a lot of activity and energy. And then we've thought about, okay, but we still want to have a focused cohort so we can really support each individual founder with the right kind of mentorship and the right kind of, we want to see them. We want to look at them and say, we see you and we see what you're trying to do. So yeah, I think if you are going to increase your cohort, you need to balance it out some way with being able to make sure they feel like they're not just part of a MOOC or a massive online open course that they can drop out, which typically have less than 5% completion rates.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's a recipe, right? I mean, and it depends what you're trying to bake. So if you want to, bake a particular type of cake that takes a lot of time, it's obviously going to put the time you put in. If you do it right, it'll come out in the results. And if you kind of want to do feed the masses, really simple recipe, it'll be less complicated. You can give it to a lot of people, but the end result might not be as special.
Won't be as tasty.
Yeah, it won't be as tasty. So just to clarify for everybody, before we hit record, Jeanette was telling me that she's quite the cook. And also she has a beautiful new little Springer Spaniel puppy who likes to keep her company while she's whipping up a storm in the kitchen. Hence the recipe analogy.
She's very excited about my increased time in the kitchen, and she likes to hang around my feet to see if I accidentally drop things. But yes, you're right. It is like, setting up a new program. It is like baking or creating something. You're thinking about what are the ingredients, how long are we going to run it for, what's the desired outcome from this, and what if the cake sinks in the middle. So sometimes that might happen. And right now, we, as alongside with everybody else, we are learning in public. We are doing our best, and all you can really do is this kind of iterative feedback. Like right now, one of my team members is on the phone speaking to founders that we just went through, like really trying to extract from them what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better. And I think that's what we all have to do right now. We're all back to kind of learning and practicing what we preach, really.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time, I guess, because a lot of the expectations around delivery that people used to have with anything were linked to the fact that you'd be going to a venue and it would all be kind of set out, whereas now everybody, I think, appreciates that everybody else is doing a lot of stuff on the fly, in the sense of doing their best to adapt. And I think that breeds a huge amount of new transparency, around the humans who are actually delivering the program. And I
Mhm.
think people are a lot more forgiving. And,
Yeah, what a great way to be, to encourage innovation. I think, that perfectionist mindset is something that hounded me pretty much my, growing up and going to uni, and my first 10 years of work in the corporate world. Really feeling like you had to be perfect, feeling like you had to tick all the boxes. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. There's plenty of people out there that still feel they can't launch something until it's perfect. And so, what a really interesting environment for us to all get used to that mindset that we learn in the startup world about version 1 is better than version none.
yes, 100%.
Right?
Uh,
Yeah.
it kind of feeds nicely into my next question. So something else which is also featured in these conversations is the fact that COVID and travel restrictions, and the fact that we've gone from a very much connected and global market to something which has become a little bit more fragmented. So the walls are up in some countries more than others,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really shone a light on the dependency on this international supply chain. And a lot of people talk about that from the perspective of manufacturing, but actually there's sovereignty of innovation as well. So that ability to grow your own and actually, have your own ideators and creators within your own borders. So from the Hacker Exchange's perspective, I guess it puts you guys in a unique position, because what you're really talking about doing in many occasions is giving, in the Australian example, Australian participants the chance to go to these other markets and learn, and then take that back.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's a really, I remember speaking to, I think it's Patrick Lee, he's the founder of Rotten Tomatoes, and he was talking about the concept of, you say you seed innovation, right? What does that mean? And he actually described it as, it's literally like an oak tree. You plant something. Silicon Valley's been around for a long time. It's a big tree. One company grows and it drops a lot of acorns and it seeds more companies. That's talent, that's investment, that's expertise. And I think, you look at ecosystems maybe like Melbourne, and maybe we're still growing. We're not a sapling, but we're a bit bigger, but we're not a giant oak tree yet. And so it stands to reason that we don't have that same volume of stuff being seeded. So I think that by introducing our students and founders to more mature ecosystems, they can kind of get a sense of what does this look like? What are the attitudes that people have? What are the behaviors? And then, and this is probably the coolest thing, we don't tell them just to come home and replicate that. We tell them to think about, what does this mean for you in your context as a founder and a leader? What does this mean for you as a contributor to your local ecosystem? Which bits do you like? Which bits do you think are, you could take it or leave it? There's a lot of argument out there to say that places like Silicon Valley might be a bit passé. We're looking at Estonia, we're looking at South Korea, we're trying to find where's the future coming from. And so I think when you bring students and young people and founders to these different cities, they can do that sponge thing, but it's really important then to stand up and go, what's sticking? Because not everything's going to stick. And that's where the individual values, I think, come to the fore, and the ecosystem values come to the fore.
Yeah, so true, so true. And when we look at the Australian ecosystem and we talk about that sovereignty of innovation, irrespective of that, we all know, the cats and dogs in the street know that you have to have a really strong innovation ecosystem if you expect, good, strong technology companies to come out of it, to employ people, to feed money back into, the nation, and increase GDP and all of those wonderful things which help a country to grow and a society to be successful. Outside of, kind of this cross-pollination of startup ecosystems, what do you think the main levers are in Australia to help kind of lift all those boats in the startup ecosystem? There's a small question for you.
That's a huge question. I mean, yeah, you're right. What's that stat? I think that we hear that, the Victorian startups ecosystem brings over $4 billion worth of value to the economy. That's great, but the levers to pull. I mean, we obviously work in the education space, the innovation. So I think that educators and the education system has a huge part to play in, seeding the attitudes and the behaviors and the learning behaviors that are required for great innovators in the future. So I think that there's probably some learning design levers that we could pull all the way down through our high school and primary school industries, and there's some amazing educators out there already working on this stuff, I know. I think, in the ecosystems that we see that seem to be quite connected, there's a really interesting through line from government through to corporate, through to education, through to startup. It's not to say that they're all specifically connected or pointing in the same direction, but there's a lot of interconnectivity from a network perspective. So they understand why, why they're doing something. They understand each other's incentives. So there's probably a part to play there in the corporate Australia lever. Like I came from working 14 years in corporate, and I think when I left, there was certainly not a significant population of the corporate team that would understand why startups do what they do, or why why people act in that way, why they choose to have such a risky life. And also they might not have understood how they can support in the position of perceived power from a startup's perspective. So I think it's just everyone understanding their roles to play and the incentives that exist for other players.
So it's a combination of education, so teaching people that they can, and maybe how, and then also providing them with the incentives or support to let them have a go, as they would say, a fair go.
A fair go, yeah. I mean, we know that Singapore, like they provided, I think, $7,000 per citizen to upskill in like new economy skills.
Oh wow!
That was a government initiative where they said we're going to actually invest in our people. And I don't know if that's the right thing for Australia. And obviously we're in a very interesting economic time right now. But I think I'm definitely seeing a lot of focus on it's the skill sets, it's the mindsets, it's the networking, and then it's kind of the personal individual confidence that everyone needs to bring to the table, because without that, like the other three things don't matter. Like you might be super skilled, have a great mindset and have a great network. If you don't do anything, like it's not going to move the needle. So
how do you engender that confidence in an ecosystem?
This is probably, Brian, this is probably why we spend so much time on the individual, because you've got to give individuals like enough, is it what, self-efficacy or self-confidence to sort of say, I have the ability to do something that's active and make change. And I guess one of the reasons I get out of bed in the morning is because I know that there are people, particularly young people, going to work and waiting for permission from a manager to do something interesting or to do something socially focused. And what I want to see is less of that. I want to give them the confidence so that they don't feel they have to wait to step into their leadership power. So I think mentors are super important. I think people in industry giving young people the time of day, and not just young people, but anyone who's like trying to do something new, like this, just having a great pay it forward mindset and like helping others to take a small step in a new direction. I think we all have power there. And that's something I want to see us all do a bit more of.
Yeah, I like that. And it's something I believe as well. I think that, everybody needs a champion in their corner, and it doesn't have to be somebody who takes them all the way or supports them, but just says, give it a shot, or is generous with their time, to help somebody, bounce a few questions off or whatever it may be. But it is that not hive mind, but a community kind of mind that makes a difference.
Yeah, you only need to be a couple of steps ahead of someone else to help them along. So I think a lot of us feel like, is that my place to be a mentor? And I really, I didn't think it was my place for a while, until you realize, gosh, there's a lot of stuff I learned in that last 15 years that could be useful to someone who's now starting out. And again, they can sponge it up and then they can stand up and take it or leave it.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I can tell anybody who's listening or watching that I have seen Jeanette in action, mentoring and coaching many startup founders in RMIT Activator. I'd say very lucky people to have the opportunity to learn.
I guess I will shout out, because RMIT was our very first partner for Hacker Exchange. So without RMIT, we might
really?
So,
oh wow! Yeah. Well, they've been a big influence on our own journey as well. Really big fans of the RMIT Activator crew. Here's one for you. Last 12 months, what is your biggest learning?
I guess, I can be a little bit vulnerable here. In the last 12 months, we went through some team changes. The co-founder that I started my business with decided to work on some new projects, which is awesome. But that kind of stuff is really hard in a business. So I learned a lot about myself and my, how to kind of maybe regulate maybe still learning, regulate some of my emotional reactions to things that are happening in a business sense, and trying to make sure that that's something that I could take care of myself with and my team with. And probably the other biggest learning at the start of COVID was, if you can actually find a way to serve your community and to figure out what your community needs from you, it was the way for me to help me like kind of get over my own stress and my own anxiety about the situation. It was like, okay, times like this call for a leader. I don't know if that's me. I might have a very small, like little community that I deal with. But what do they need from me? And there was a really interesting analogy, and I can't remember the source. I'll have to put it in the comments of your LinkedIn thing. But it's like when a child falls down and scrapes their knee, they look around for a teacher or a parent to kind of put a Band-Aid on it and give them a hug. So it's solve my problem, make me feel better. And with the onset of COVID, the entire world fell down and scraped their knee, and we looked around for leaders to give us a hug and put a Band-Aid, and there was no one there.
Yeah.
So if you can be that person for your community, it's even in a really small way, and even if it's for your co-founder or your friend or your mum or something, like taking that small act of leadership is super powerful and super helpful. So that's probably my biggest learning from the last 12 months.
That's huge. And I mean, I think what I kind of felt was a really interesting line between those two was both had a lot to do with self-awareness.
Yeah. I think that's like, you could be doing careers, doing a job for 30, 50 years and learn new stuff about yourself every day. So taking some time to kind of like, this is great because like you're giving me like time to self-reflect. This is like, do you charge for therapy sessions, Brian?
Hang on a second, startup founder. This could be a business opportunity. How much would you pay? No, it's a pleasure to talk. And like I said, it's one of the really interesting things about this series of conversations that we're having is that, and as I mentioned before, is that there's so much content out there for founders, and there's so much content out there for teams. And it's right that there is, to help them support each other. But a lot of the time, I think sometimes people skip over the fact that actually the people delivering programs, the people, providing the infrastructure and the kind of paths for founders to travel through, they're also founders and human beings. And, there isn't necessarily enough conversations around the challenges that are shared and very, very common across that group of people, I think. So
yeah,
it's
we're definitely
good.
operating on this like two speeds, like the front of house thing. It's like, yep, everything's okay. Like we're good. We're still, everything's fine. We've got some plans. We've got a strategy. And then, having the safe space with your team and your friends to be like, I just need to fall apart today for like half a day.
Yeah.
And then
I need to walk around the block. I'm leaving my phone behind me. Everybody's leaving me alone for 10 minutes.
And then coming back to be strong for your community. It's a real two-speed thing. So thank you for shining that light on us. We're doing all right, but it's been a rough few months.
We're all in it together.
That's it, exactly.
So we're coming towards the end now, and I've got a couple of interesting questions for you, as if the last ones haven't been interesting.
Sure.
So congratulations, here's a crystal ball. I would like you to look into this magical crystal ball and take a pragmatic look and think, that will do, and think, what will the Australian startup ecosystem look like in 24 months? So realistically, there's a lot going on at the moment, and 2 years is both a long time in the life of a startup, but it's not that long in the life of an ecosystem. Where do you think we might be sitting?
Interesting. I guess I would like to see, what I'm predicting is that like Australia might start to define itself a little bit more in terms of what are the 2 or 3 industries that we just kick ass at. I think that's something that other great ecosystems are good at, is that they have a particular thing that they're a little bit known for. So I know that Victoria's kind of got, health tech and sports tech, and Sydney's got Fin, and like there's a few different things around. But I would like to see, firstly, the Australian ecosystem come together. Like I'm not a big fan of the intercity rivalry. Like we are, as far as the rest of the world is considered, one place. So there's a little bit of like, let's come together and boost each other up instead of fighting internally. I'd like to see us having a bit more clarity on our identity as an ecosystem. I reckon we probably would see like another few unicorns pop out in the next couple of years. These are interesting times, and there's some creative people working on some cool stuff right now. I don't know how specific you want me to get, but that's kind of what I see. And I reckon you'll probably end up with a situation where entrepreneurship, like lens education, is common throughout
Mm.
primary, secondary, and tertiary
I think
education.
that'd be a great outcome, and I love that. This is a very positive spin on what's going to happen in the next 2 years. Because while there's a lot of doom and gloom out there,
What are
there's
other people
also
saying?
well, no, it's been very much a total mix because the reality is that there's going to be some fantastic stuff that's going to come out of all of this change, and there's
Mm,
going to be some big challenges too, and nobody's denying either side of that. But I think it's really great and important to kind of also say, well, there is all this good stuff that's coming out. Let's
yeah.
talk about that. And I think you're right. There's some incredibly exciting companies in Australia at the moment who are, probably at that stage where they're really getting ready for super
Mm,
growth in terms of moving internationally.
yeah.
I think that what has come up in the previous conversations was probably the tier below that. So it was
Yeah, the investment. Yeah, the investment will certainly be a little bit harder to come by for sure.
yeah.
I think that's probably a situation where we'll all have to kind of come together with upskilling, reskilling, and I think new teams are going to form, and they're going to be quite unexpected. So
Mm,
new teams might include people that are maybe corporate refugees as well as people from the startup space that have fallen over, and that might be an incredible new cross-skilled team that no one saw coming. And I think that we might see potentially some of the corporates that are doing well in these times maybe play the role a little bit of not a white knight, but they might start to realize the power that they have in the economy and maybe play a role there. And I don't quite know what's going to happen with the angels and stuff. I don't know. What do you guys think? What have you seen?
yeah, I mean, look, it depends. I think if I tell you what I'm reading, it's that everybody says that they're investing, and I think some people are and some people aren't. What we're seeing is some people are raising at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. I think the big question is what stage it's happening, and I think for some people at the earlier stage, it's not happening,
Mm.
the way it was. But for people who are slightly more mature, they tend to be kind of garnering that investment that is out there. Final question, Jeanette, for you is actually related to investment. And
Okay.
congratulations, here's a check for $500,000. You have to pick one startup niche to invest in.
Ooh.
Where are you going to put that $500,000 check?
Ed tech.
Ed tech.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Reasoning?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, it's virtual learning. It's only at the start. Zoom University is not going to be sustainable for the long term. There's some great ed tech here in Australia as well as around the world, and yeah, I'm pretty excited to see how we better serve the kids.
Phenomenal. Jeanette, thank you so much. I know that your laptop battery is running out, so I'm going to cut this before we both get involuntary cut off. Thank you so much for your time and for
Pleasure.
lending your expertise, because this is a conversation worth having, and you're a wonderful guest to have that conversation with. So really appreciate it.
You are a wonderful interviewer. I really appreciate the invitation, and thanks everyone for watching.
All right. Cheers.
Okay, bye.